All right. Here we are. Welcome to folks who are just popping on and joining us here. We are very glad to be back with you after a couple of weeks. My name is Sean Hayes. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And we are here doing our live kitchen table conversation with the Men and Masculine Folks Network. And really the goal that we have for these conversations is to have really organic conversations together, where we are really sort of shaping new meanings of what masculinity can be. Authentic, caring, and thoughtful is what we are working towards. And so very glad to be back. I know we've sort of been on hiatus the last couple of weeks, so it's great to be back here for our 56th live kitchen table conversation. And I'm very grateful to be joined by two of my friends here. And maybe before we jump into our conversation today, I'd love to let y'all introduce yourselves. And by the way, I'm in Duluth, Minnesota, here at Men as Peacemakers, and glad to be here.
You want to start?
Go ahead.
Okay.
I can take it.
Well, here we go. You do, Pentti.
All right. That's good. We got that out of the way now. Yeah. Sorry, Felix. Yeah. My name's Pentti, and my pronouns are he, him, and I am. I work for Men as Peacemakers. I'm in the youth program here. I'm in the same building as Sean right now, actually, just on a different floor, and I haven't figured out the background blurring feature. So this is where I'm at. All right. Thanks, Felix.
No, thank you, Pentti. Again, my name is Felix Martinez. My pronouns are he, him, and his, or él in Spanish. And I work for Esperanza United. I'm part also of the Men and Masculine Folks Network. Super happy and excited to be here in the conversation, having Pentti here. That's awesome. And I'm reporting from our main offices in St. Paul, Minnesota of Esperanza United. Super happy to be here again. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. And yeah, I know Pentti has joined us a long time ago, so it's great to see your face back here. And we're looking forward to this conversation today, which we had talked about. So March, as some of you may know and others may not know, March is Women's History Month. And so today we wanted to talk a little bit about that. Like, what is the importance of these awareness raising months? You know, we sort of started in January this year, where January is every year sex trafficking awareness month, as well as February, Black History Month, and now in March, Women's History Month. So we want to talk a little bit about why is that important, and why do we celebrate and recognize these different groups throughout the year. And then I'm also hoping to hear a little bit of story from each of us about, a woman, a particular person, or if there's a group of women, femme folks, non-binary folks who have really been a part of your life in some way, have touched you, have mentored you, or impacted or inspired you. I would love to get to share some stories and hear about those really amazing people. So yeah, just want to open it up for folks, whoever would like to kind of go first. And and then as a reminder, we always love when our viewers tune in as well and share your thoughts, share your questions and comments as we are having these discussions. So at any point, if you're watching now or later on, we'd love to hear your thoughts and anything you might want to share with us. So thanks. And whoever wants to take it away, go for it.
I can jump in. Thank you, Sean, and thank you, Pentti, again. Wow, March, women's. Oh my God, how you cannot be inspired with history of women, especially in my life and in history, everything. I think if I give you my perspective and my experience, I mean, I grew up in a family where women were the majority. There was the one in charge of continue with the traditions of the family dishes, so many important things, the ones that show us to be loving to each other, caring, some of those feelings that sometimes men were not maybe allowed to show up just because, we societal wise, we thought it was, more feelings that women were okay to show up, but men wasn't. So I think I'm being very lucky to have a lot of strong women in my life that have teach me a lot of things, that they've been very supportive, especially of me and my role now as a as a feminist, you can call it that way, or a man that's been trying to create more awareness, especially in Latino men, about patriarchy, the harms that patriarchy bring to our society, and working in this nonprofit world. When you look at the people around you, the people that support you, it, I wouldn't say it's not sad to say, but they're mostly women and female identified folks, that been working in this movement. And even there's a lot of men. I think when we see history, men tend to be more silent. So when you think in March and celebrate women, I think we should not limit it to 1 month. I mean, women bring so much strength, when you think about what women have going through in history and how strong they are. Me being a father of two daughters are some of those things that inspire me to change my career and step up and be sure that more men understand, the harms of patriarchy and the importance of being part of this movement, being part of being allies of women, and have a better understanding what women go through every single day, and also female identified folks. So I think women's are the reason why I do this job. Right now I work a full time in a nonprofit, creating awareness, talking about manhood, masculinities, patriarchy, how like repeating again how much harm it brings to our society. But they've been my inspiration. Being a father of two daughters have pushed me to step up, being in a position where in the beginning I felt very uncomfortable, and still I do, especially when I have conversation with other men, because I know I'm not perfect. I have some biases, and there's some of those things that I keep working to become a better man, a better role model, to become a better ally. So when I think of women's in my life, I think like I mentioned in the beginning, I mean, those are the ones who are bringing the stories to the newer generations, the importance of food, tradition, even language. When men in the past used to have a different, role, to be the provider and leaving all those things to the woman, and some of those roles, now that times have changed and now women work too full time, and they continue having those roles, it makes you think about how much women are caring, especially with the family, and how important they're for us, especially for me too. So for me, when I think in women's in my life, I need to think in my spouse. I think my mother, my grandmother, but especially my spouse. I'll bring it now just because she's been the one who's been pushing me. Uh, he's been giving me that that hand, especially just to be in situations that I feel uncomfortable, but being there to me to say, you know what, you can do it. We need more allies. And I've been very lucky to have her in my life, to give me the privilege of being a father. And things that it remind me every single day the importance of creating change, to creating more equity, in our society. So in the future, women don't need to go through the situations that they go every single day. Privilege that men have, and sometimes we don't want to let go just because it benefits us. And that's why I think I do what I do. I think that's what I want to encourage other men to have these type of conversations, to start looking at those women in our lives, that when you look at statistic of how many women experience sexual assault, some type of violence or abuse, when you think that it's 1 in 3, that's huge. That's huge. How what women go through, and how some men decide to be silent, or they're afraid of making that step. So hopefully through this conversation we could inspire some other men or masculine folks to learn a little bit more and see what's their role? It could be a passive role, could be you can support the movement in so many different ways, but acknowledge all those positive things that women have bring, not only in our lives but also in history, in science, in every aspect of life. So I'm very, very thankful of all those women, all those teachings. And yeah, and like I said, if I need to pick one today, I would say my spouse, but of course have people like my mother, my grandmother, even my daughters. I mean, they inspire me every single day, and there's not a day in my life that I can learn something new from them. So I'm super grateful again, and yeah, I encourage all men and masculine folks out there to listen to their stories and try to put ourselves in their situation and their positions to have a better understanding and to learn more how we can become better allies in a way that don't cause harm and bring more love, resiliency, and strength to those women that are out there, going through some of those hardships that they keep experiencing year after year. So yeah.
I can sort of, I'm glad you went first, Felix, because I was definitely having some sort of in thinking about this question before we all signed on today. I was kind of feeling I was looking for a femme mentor, or thinking about a coworker or something like that who stood out to me, and realizing that a lot of this sort of learning that I've done, or a lot of the really impactful relationships I've had with women are in the context of family or romantic relationships. And it feels a little, I don't know why that somehow doesn't feel I feel a little bit of a hang up there. But I want that to be this, I want those learnings to be in this other sphere. But yeah, that's not really the case for this. And so when I think about family, I know you mentioned that you grew up in a family that was, I think you said majority women, and where the women in that family were really the sort of kind of holders of tradition and the ones who were moving forward language and moving forward food. I of course just think about my grandma Esther, who is now passed, but she passed right around the time when I went to college in 2015. But for the longest time, that was her place down in southeastern Minnesota is where the whole family congregated for Thanksgiving. That was the sort of time of year where everyone got together. And now that she's gone, I think the sort of the importance of having that place and her role in getting everyone together is feeling really clear. And we're making it work for sure. We're figuring out, we're in transition time. We're kind of figuring out as a family, how to spend time with each other in a new way. But yeah, at the time I never would have, one, because I was young, but two, because I just didn't have that type of perspective. I never would have been oh, she's actually holding us all down right now. She's enforcing, without trying to, maybe enforcing kind of rules about behavior and stuff like that. She's, the center of all this important family stuff. And gosh, so I think about her, and then, yeah, I think about, women and femme people I've been in romantic relationships with. And honestly, what comes to mind there is people just not tolerating nonsense or dishonesty from me. And I can think of a pretty early moment, actually, around that same time when I was getting out of high school, where the person I was with at the time, we were in a store, and I was saying something out of line, like some sort of like some, I don't remember what it was, but we were actually on Superior Street, close to where the Menace Peacemakers office is. I don't know if it used to be Global Village that was down the street from us. It's right next to the place that sells all the fur now. We were in there, and I was saying something dumb, some like, you know, something sexist, some sexist joke. And the person I was with, she was like, when you say that, like in front of like the woman who was working the cash register, she's like, when you say that, and I think what she actually said was more colorful than this, but like when you say that, like it makes people think you're serious about that. And I was like, oh yeah, like I guess it does. And so honestly, just like thinking about the people who've kind of checked me and who've held me accountable, and then maybe I'll leave it at that. I could think more on examples there, but that's it to start.
Yeah, thanks, Pentti and Felix, for sharing about how those folks have shown up in your lives. And I know for me, I think Pentti, your story around your grandma made me think about my grandma. And she has always sort of been like the powerhouse of our family. And one of the lessons I think that she taught me very early on, and she really, she pushed this for all of us. So it wasn't just me, but, it was sort of this idea of like, get out there and explore and try new things. Because we really don't know, what we don't know, right? Especially as I was, in junior high and high school and thinking about where to go to college and things like that. I just remember, and even at the time, I remember feeling a little annoyed because grandma was just like, you gotta get out of the box. You gotta try these new things, and sort of just, not aggressively, but like, pushing me forward and pushing, my other cousins and people in the family forward, and really to try to experience more of the world, which I think is a really beautiful lesson that I haven't thought about in a long time. So I'm grateful to you, Pentti, for your sharing that brought that to mind. And when I think back to like most of the like pivotal moments in my life, the pivotal like moments where I was growing or pushed to grow or to change, the way that I was living my life, or how I was showing up in community, like I would say 9 times out of 10, it was a woman or a femme person who was like doing that sort of guiding and like, hey, Sean, like I see this is what you're doing right now. And I don't think that's how you want to be perceived. And, like really take a look at like how you're acting and how you're choosing to, the words, the jokes, things like that I say, right? I think specifically of, I would say my friend and also my boss, Sarah Curtis. She has really, I would say, radically changed my life for the better, and just in, not a way where, she's always been on my case or anything like that about like, hey, Sean, you got to do better, but just like someone who has been there with me through, a lot of growth and has been a part of a lot of my own healing, I think. And she would probably be very humble about that. But, as someone who is just always showing up, always there. And it sort of made me think about this whole concept that I think, since becoming a dad, I really sort of started hearing more about this thing, where it's like we sort of talk about like the invisible load that women and femme people and non-binary folks hold in our lives and in our relationships and our families. My mom also is a great example of someone who really just holds things together. Like they know all of the details. They can tell you, hey, that's where that pair of socks is, and just all sorts of things that I think we as, men in mask folks really, I think, have benefited from a ton throughout our lives, right? Like growing up, as well as in our relationships and in our families and communities. Like when I think about being at events here in town. Like it's the majority women folks who are there early setting up, who are preparing food, who are hanging out with the kids, who are speaking and singing and like leading these things as well. And so, it's just sort of making me think a little bit more about the privilege that comes with being a masculine person and how we sort of just have gotten to rely on women and femme folks to sort of take care and hold all of these things. And then, it's like, I don't know, I'll see TikToks or different memes about that, right? Where it's like the dad or whatever is trying to help, like, oh, how can I help in this like morning routine? But then doesn't know any of the details about like his own kids. Like, what do they eat for breakfast? Like, what do you send them for lunch? All of these sorts of, it's so much, I think, that we have relied on women to hold for us. And so I'm just thinking about that piece, in my own life, right? As a dad, as a coworker, just as a community member, like, where are the ways that we as men and mask folks can and need to really step it up, to sort of help our communities flourish in a way that isn't so reliant on women being the main and only holders of, things like emotions, things like those family details and the care, the nurture. I'm just pondering that. And I know I have a lot of work to do in that area still, because I think just, we just don't realize how much our women, our wives, our partners, mothers, mentors are doing to really keep us all going.
Thank you, by the way. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Pentti. I think the more I think and I listen to you guys too, start thinking in other women that have a huge impact in my life, and I need to give them a shout out, people like Lena and I call to man. I think someone that always been there, always been supportive and pushing, for us to get the best from us. Amy Sanchez and BJ, I think it's BWJP, I think it is, Patty Tutorcintle here at Esperanza United, Corinne Sanchez at Tewa Women's United in New Mexico. I think those are strong women that, that have been giving me so many teachings during this time that have recognized, that something in me that I never saw before that give me the strength to do what I do right now, and at the same time realize that a lot of men feel uncomfortable, being taught by women just because of that patriarchy that exists in us, that misunderstanding that maybe when when you're taught by women make you weak, then that's totally the opposite, what we have in this conversation. And I think in all these women in these positions that they're creating so much change in our communities, it's like how we can continue pushing and understanding, the importance of, of providing that base to them and that strength to them to continue doing it. Because even when I talk to them and I listen to their stories, I realize that they're also tired, they're carrying so much on them, and how we can be there for them and provided that, that strength and support, to be sure that these organizations continue doing the amazing job that they're doing right now. And you also mentioned, people like Sarah and Map, Noel. I mean, they're amazing women, and I don't think they get the credit that they deserve to. I think we need to continue looking for resources and to continue doing this work, especially because a lot of the time it's so hard, especially for the men work, to look for grants, to look for money, to support the work that we're doing, because this is something that is not new, but when you understand patriarchy, and when you invite men to these spaces and you see a lot of men that get super excited, you get like 30 people sign in and you're like, okay, we got this. And when you start doing the groups, 3 show up. It's like, okay, what we're missing here. I think it's commitment. It's what is, and there's when we need to also listen to women. They have answers that sometimes as men we don't want to listen, and we think we know everything, when we in reality we don't. I mean, we are a society when we need each other, uh that complement us. It's not like we're all our whole self. It's not like when you say, oh, here's my other half. We're complete selves being. We don't need someone to complete us, but we need to understand that when we work together, we can create more change in our communities. Uh, Something that I have learned with time, I'm not gonna lie to you, before probably start working here, I have some understandings, but the more that I work, the more that I listen to these amazing leaders, we need to recognize that we need them. We need them. I think there's other women's also in history that have created a lot of change. We have like Sylvia Rivera, that's probably in the trans movement. I think she's a Venezuelan Puerto Rican trans woman that was an activist and create a lot of change in the LGBTQ movement that we need to recognize. We have women's, like a lot of Latina women's in history that create a lot of change too. We have, I think the name, I'm trying to remember the name. It was probably the first female in space. I think it's Elena Ochoa, first Latina or Hispanic women. So when you look at history, you see all these many role models. How we can encourage, at least me as a father of 2 daughters. How we can teach them. Look at these amazing leaders. Look all these amazing women or female identify women that they're out there creating change. How we can encourage that to our daughters through talking history, so they can realize that they have the power to do that and compete with those misogynistic movies, TV shows that show so much harm, and continue not allowing women to be maybe the best versions of themselves. And that's where I put myself, and I try to create changes to be sure that doesn't happen anymore. So at least if we see shows on TV that show that the objectify women, that don't show that real face of what women go through, what we need to do to be sure that happen. So I think there's a lot of good men out there, and we understand that there's better good men than bad men. So I encourage them to have those conversations, to think, in those moments in your life, because me as a father, sometimes I think, what if I pass away today? Do my daughters have what they need to be successful? I would like to say yes, but as a father, I can continue seeing my daughters like my babies. Doesn't matter how old they're gonna be, they're always gonna be my babies. I always gonna have that feeling that I need to protect them, when in reality, they have what they need to be successful, to be strong. But I also realize that this world, it could be very dangerous, is very harmful sometimes, and we need to start calling out, those individuals that causing harm. You're not supporting movies that bring some of those topics, those misogynistic topics, or what those topics that cause so much harm. A reason also why maybe I don't have the big amount of friends I used to have in the past. So surround yourself of people can bring the best of you. They can, that that they're gonna support also not only yourself but the women in your lives. And let's not think having a lot of friends a good thing. Is having maybe a smaller group but a more meaningful group. It can make a huge difference in your life, and the women in your life too. So
So I've been over here thinking about I've got if you're down to revisit the women that inspire us prompt, I was thinking about another one. But I do just want to, but before I run my mouth about that, the thing about women consistently showing up and doing the work is like that really rings true for me. I feel like I just had a lot of examples of that. Most recently in like, you know, through the youth work, there's a group in town called DIAC, which is like, you know, it's sort of a group of people who work for different youth serving agencies in Duluth. And I think youth work and working with kids in general is probably a pretty femme dominated area. But man, in these meetings, I was just like, oh wow, this is really majority women in these spaces, and like majority women coming together time after time to make something happen, you know, caring about the things worth caring about. I even think about, and this is, I remember hearing this on the radio at one point. So this, I might only have a piece of the story, but I think after Colin Kaepernick first kneeled during the anthem, I think that was, you know, there were big schools in the South where members of their football teams did the same. And again, I could have this backwards, but in the story I'd heard, there was maybe some hesitation around the guy among the guys playing about whether or not they were going to do that. And it was the women that they were close with, specifically Black women, who were like, hey, this is really important. You have power here because you are playing for a big school, and you playing football for a big school. You can make a really big statement here. Anyways, women doing the work. Woman that is, well, I should actually take a pause there just before I launch into this next thing. Either of you have any thoughts about that?
I was just going to chime in to say that's really interesting. Maybe that's another, you know, avenue where this conversation goes. But like, you know, the fact that we as men and masculine folks do hold power, you know, whether it's within our workplaces, our families, communities, and like, how are we using that power for good? How are we using that power to like bring more men into the movement rather than relying on women to continue sort of doing all of it? And so that was just an interesting thing that popped in my mind, is like, you know, do we really understand how much power we have as masculine folks in this society? And like, what is possible, like if we were to sort of like, you know, wield this power more so for good. But
God, yeah, I think about just even in terms of like men's voices being like just by default listened to more, like commanding more attention, you know. Yeah, that's right. That's totally power, you know. Yeah, it's like credibility that you never had to earn. Yeah. Can I talk about Emily Ford now? So like Duluth celebrity, if you were to poll like 10 Duluthians, they'd probably like who they think is the coolest person in Duluth. I think whatever 8 out of 10 would be like it's Emily Ford. But yeah, Emily Ford is the first, I think for sure the first woman to hike. I don't know if it's the Ice Age Trail. And she did that. It was just her and her dog, I think. And I know she's done all sorts of other wild outdoor stuff like that. But I think, and I'm, you know, lucky enough to have like gotten to talk with her a couple of times. But what I really think is so she's also a woman of color. Just like added levels of doing what she wants. I think the doing what she wants thing is just like what I think is so cool about Emily. Last I heard she was working as like an arborist, like, doing the tree climbing at Glensheen. And, when the weather gets cold, we'll go on these like unreal outdoor expeditions. And like, I just get the sense that Emily is like doing exactly what feels good for Emily. And I did want to just, and like, that's the stuff I think is cool. Like the little, like the jobs she does and like the things she has as hobbies is like what I think is cool. But I also just think about, I had this experience with her once where we were, we're at like, there was a work party for a place I used to work at, and she was there, and it was nighttime, but I was like drinking coffee, that's what was going on. Drinking coffee. And I remember like Emily came up to me and was like, hey, like coffee might give you more, like, it's going to give you more energy right now, but it's not like, it's only making you more tired. Like if you really are, if you think you need more energy, you just need to rest. And from anybody else, I would have been like, would you shut up? Like what are you talking about? But from Emily Ford, I was kind of like, oh yeah, like, okay, I guess you've got a point. Just because of how rad she is. So anyways, there's my little Emily Ford geek out. I hope I haven't totally derailed the seriousness of the conversation, but I feel like I like needed to share to send some love her way.
No, I love that. And it actually brought to mind too. So here at Men as Peacemakers, if you have never been here, we're in Duluth, but if you haven't been to our building before, when you first walk in the front doors, we sort of have these huge windows and all glass, and these sort of window display areas that one of our female coworkers, Laura Anderson, does a wonderful job. And I think a lot of folks helped her as well, but she has been creating these different window displays. We have all of this sort of real estate there. And so she has been working to sort of, bring awareness or raise, the education and things, just, people walking by, and they stop and they look. And right now there's this huge, beautiful, I would say, exhibit that she and folks here have put together that is highlighting local women and femme folks who are doing really cool stuff up here in Duluth. And I think, Pentti, your story about Emily kind of jogged that in my memory, because I think, we think of like Ellen Pence, and I don't know all of the history, but, Ellen is a person who, like started and helped create the Duluth model, which is, globally known in the domestic violence world. And then there's also folks up there like Shaquana McIntyre, who, if you're from anywhere nearby Duluth, you probably have heard her name because of all of the incredible work that she has done within the Black community, as well as, the larger community. And then one person who I was supposed to get Laura some info about this, so I messed up that. But a good friend of mine, who is also just a powerhouse of a gal, is Alice Schrader, who is the founder of a group here called Zenith City Horror. Trans woman. She founded this theater company, and they have for several years been doing tons of different shows around town, and especially bringing a lot of drag events and bingo nights, and just sort of like pushing forward the stories of queer and trans women. I think who I think that when we think of Women's History Month, I feel like a lot of folks are thinking about white women, and we know that white women got the right to vote, years before women of color and things like that. So I just think of these folks who have sort of lived, maybe more so in the shadows, who, like Alice now, she's like, I'm done living in the shadows. I'm coming out with my full power, and we are doing, the drag events, and we are talking about queerness and transness. And I just, it makes me think of, you mentioned already, Felix, Sylvia Rivera, and Marsha P. Johnson, who were really, revolutionaries who started off, the LGBT rights movement back in the 60s. And so when I think of powerful women, it's those folks who are, not necessarily out in front, like I think of Kia Ronning as well, the founder of the Northland BIPOC Business Showcase that just happened in February. And like, just, being behind the scenes with these folks and seeing how much like not only work they put forward, but like the pride and the joy and creativity. And it's just, I don't know, it feels unreal a lot of the time. So it feels like a really big privilege to be able to like know some of these folks, call them friends, and also get to sort of do what we can to further, the work they're doing in our communities.
Absolutely, Sean. I think we need to always look for different ways to continue supporting and empowering, women and girls, every day. And sometimes, when we think about ways to do it, of course, by creating awareness is, it's a simple thing, bringing these topics, utilize social media, to show some of those stories. And the same way, I will encourage the individuals that are listening to this, to this conversation, to utilize the chat and share also, women in your life that have create, an impact one way or the other, just because that's how we relate. I think by relating, listen to stories from, other folks, or, it can help you maybe realize, that maybe we have some privileges that other people don't have, and through listen to those stories is how we can, realize the importance of continue, empowering women and girls in our communities, supporting girls' education. There's a lot of good organizations out there that empower women and help women to be in positions where, in the past they didn't have that opportunity. Now we have the first female vice presidents. I mean, change is happening already, but how long is going to take to maybe in the United States here to have the first female president? I think we're very close, but we need to, start putting those young girls and women in those positions and be supportive and be better allies. I think by being a mentor, I think it's another opportunity that we can have those conversations, provide those tools that maybe in the past they didn't have, to let them know, other women that have been successful in science, history, technology, everything, So in order to do that, and those are some of the ways that we can do it, encouraging them, reminding them that they're strong enough, that they can do everything they can, even that when the society is closing doors sometimes in front of us, there's other doors opening in the back. So let's look, for those opportunities. Let's look for those ways that we can continue encouraging, those strong women in our lives. And by simple speak up, let's, like we're doing today, having those conversations. I remember growing up and being in difficult situations where, I need someone, to give me love, just because I was struggling. I was struggling maybe in school, I was struggling in life, in relationships. And sometimes those women in my life, that was the ones that give me that hug when I need it, when by the society, men, they didn't have that role, or they didn't came to me when I really needed. And women are the ones who provide me that support, in those difficult moments. So I think that's why it's so important to keep those, those things in mind, speak up, being there, be a mentor. There's so many ways we can continue supporting women and girls, and being sure that we have more women in positions of power, because they can help us see men things that we don't normally see, just because we're in a society that benefit us, that put us in situations, in positions of power, and sometimes being in that situation don't make you realize, what women and girls or female identified folks go every single day. So I think, just encourage everybody listening, just write down in the chat one woman that you recognize that has inspired you to become a better person, better role model, better father, etc. Because I think through those connections, when we realize, the importance of this work, the importance of women in our lives, the importance of women in history, and to lift their voices and lift the amazing work that they do every single day.
Yeah, gosh. I definitely am resonating with everything y'all are sharing here. And just that piece around how can we, take and follow the leadership of women and femme folks, right, in our communities. Something that you were saying there, Felix, was making me think about, you know, at the Men and Masculine Folks Network, one of the sort of program things that we offer is called the Community Leadership Institute. And the goal is really to bring in young, men and masculine identifying folks and sort of give them a little bit of a crash course in social justice work. And it always sort of starts off with this, talking about the history of how violence has shown up, especially against Black and brown bodies and LGBTQ plus folks in history. And, this idea of, we need, that's my belief. We need way more women and femme folks in those positions of power, in those leadership roles. And I think, thinking back through, the pieces of history that I have learned, whether in school or whether doing this work, oftentimes these disasters and the terrible violence that we see is happening while men are, running the show. And so, if you ask me, I feel like we really need to shake that up. Men are not terrible humans, and the whole "not all men" and "all men" thing is a separate conversation, I think. But when we look at our communities, it's not majority men, and so why would we want to be sort of led and have those folks only in positions of power, thinking about the vice presidency. I think about here in Minnesota, our Lieutenant Governor, Peggy Flanagan, and all of the women now who are kind of coming forward and are getting voted into office and are really, doing a lot of great work just right from the get-go. And I think, we as men have sort of been sleeping a little bit through history and allowing a lot of violence to happen and also perpetrating a lot of that violence. And so I don't know, I imagine, communities that have leadership structures that do like resemble the community that they're serving, right? There is a balance of power between feminine folks and masculine folks and everyone in between or off of that spectrum gender wise. I just, I have a feeling that our communities would be a lot better off if more women, had been in power. And I think that's a huge way that we can sort of help make that change, right? Like use the power and privilege we have to maybe get folks in the room and then say, hey, I'm not here to do the talking. Here's my, female friend who's actually the one who knows, who is the expert. And I'm going to sit back and shut up and let her do the talking. So, I just think about that piece too. Like, how do we push folks or help enable or raise money or, what are those ways that we can get more women and femme folks in places of power? Because I think, transformation happens. And we've seen women, queer folks, and non-binary folks really being the leaders of these social justice movements for many, many years.
Yeah, that almost feels connected to me to before we got rolling today. I'd mentioned to Sean some interest in talking about like having months, just the idea of having months dedicated to certain groups, and sort of like why that's an important thing, what that serves to do, and that came back into my mind while both of you were talking, just based on that idea of getting women into leadership roles and encouraging women's leadership, and like Sean, I feel like you were kind of giving some actual, some strategies for being like how guys can use the power that we have to get other guys in the room or whatever, or bring attention to women. And I don't know. I mean, so I guess that's all just to say that, like, I wonder if one advantage of having, say, like a Women's History Month is just to like visibilize contributions that women and femme people have made, as a way to remind. I'm thinking about this in the context of like young girls, like remind girls that like it's possible and people have done it, and that you can do it too. But I don't know. Do either of you have any thoughts on that front around the History Month thing, about why it's important?
I think the simple thing of having that month is just to create awareness, just to acknowledge all the amazing women that have create change in history and science and everything. I think that month is just to bring that, just to remind us. I don't think we necessarily we need to limit it to 1 month a year, because I think it's unfair. I think it's like having Black History Month 1 month. It's like, why we need to celebrate it 1 month. I think all those things we need to celebrate it every single day. We need to remind everyone, our communities, every day, of the importance of these movements, the importance, why we need to continue supporting them if we want to live in communities that are loving, helpful, they have what they need to become better, every single day, to understand those conditions needed to be successful, and understand those red flags too that sometimes we see, and sometimes we decide to ignore, that allow to continue causing harm in our communities. The importance of supporting, women-owned businesses, to support that, the importance of compliment, women beyond their looks. That's something that specifically for men, that's what they look first, and we're better than that. I mean, as human beings, we're better than that. We need to put ourselves in positions where we can benefit all, and not limit ourselves to just 1 month. I think the 1 month is just a reminder, but what we need to do to be sure that every single month is, maybe instead of every month, maybe the first day of the month should be, Women History Month, or a reminder the first day of every month. I think that's how we should maybe celebrate these things, and create awareness instead of 1 month. So I think we have the knowledge. I think we have the power. I think there's a lot of great communities and organizations doing an amazing work. So how we can work together, how we can create social capital, so we can be stronger, instead of isolating each other, instead of duplicating the same work. Sometimes we have a lot of organizations doing the same work. That is important. But how we can do it strategically wise, that we can, create a deeper impact in those. And I'm super happy and proud of have amazing women in my life, And I want to acknowledge that, my daughters and women that I mentioned before, they're our inspiration, and we should be inspired every single day, every time we see them work, to be sure that we can provide those resources to be sure that they continue being successful, they can continue having better opportunities, that they can have the same salaries that men have when we have the same jobs. That at this point, I don't know why that happened, but there's some of the results or the consequences of patriarchy, and the importance why we need to start, understanding how patriarchy, the violence in patriarchy, and how we can start dismantling patriarchy to be sure it doesn't exist anymore.
Dang, you said it, Felix. I mean, that's really why I think we're here, why we are having these conversations, right? Is to really look at and reflect on how patriarchy, how these systems have allowed us to sort of thrive as men and as masculine people. And now it's like, it's sort of like once you learn that thing, now you can't actually look away and be able to feel good about that, right? Like when you see the disparity, when we see and we learn about the violence that has happened in history, throughout history, and as well as today, women are being systematically, I think, really forced down. I mean, even thinking about like the Roe v. Wade overturning and some of these things that are happening today. And so I know we're coming up on the end of our time here, but I think that, all of us have sort of given and shared some really beautiful stories of these folks who are in our lives and who have made our lives, a zillion times better and more meaningful. And I think that there are a lot of ways that we as men and masculine folks can learn. I mean, I think during these months, lots of organizations are putting out, educational posts on social media about different women in history and present day who are doing really powerful, amazing work in our communities. And so, even if that's all you do this month, like scroll through some of those posts. They're everywhere. You can find them, and do a little bit of that learning, and then maybe next step is to kind of consider, how can I, as a man, as a guy, as a masked person, how can I, begin to show up in more meaningful, caring ways for the women and femme folks around us? So on that note, I just want to say thank you to both of you for joining this conversation and sharing your experiences and being open and just having this conversation, because this is what we are trying to sort of model, is that men and masculine folks can come together. We don't have to just talk about sports and fishing and hunting all the time, like those are valuable things as well, but we can also have really beautiful conversations where we share about the women who have helped us become the men that we are. And that's really beautiful. So we encourage you, wherever you are, if you're watching right now or later after the fact, spend some time thinking about the women, the femme folks, non-binary folks in your lives who have really helped nurture and grow you. And let's think about, how can we kind of flip that a little bit and raise up and uplift their voices as well. So thank you so much again for joining us here with the Men and Masculine Folks Network at our 56th live kitchen table conversation. We want to give a shout out to our funding partners, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota and the Novo Foundation, for all of their support with these conversations continuing. And as a reminder, if you don't know, if you're new to our conversation here, we hold these conversations every other Thursday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time, right here live on our Facebook page. So we'd love to see you more often. Pop in every couple weeks with us. Very excited about our next conversation, which will be on Thursday, April 6th at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. And we will be welcoming a special guest star and friend of ours, Emiliano Diaz de Leon from the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault. As some of y'all may know, April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, so we're going to have a conversation about that with Emiliano, and so we hope you'll come back and join us for that. So don't forget to like our Facebook page. You can find us on YouTube. Get in touch with us. We'd love to connect and meet you. You can also find all of our previous conversations on our Facebook page here and YouTube channel, so check those out. We've had a lot of great ones, and certainly sending love to all of our friends who weren't able to be here today, to Peng, Roderick, Serrano, who is not feeling well, sending you good vibes, bud, as well as Ed and others who've joined us. So thanks again to all of you. We hope you take good care, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.